Hey, good evening, everybody. This is John Ball from campus of South Dakota State University, where it's raining, something we see almost continually this year. Counting raindrops and mosquitoes. I don't know about the rest of you. I've given a lot of blood this year, never have gone to the blood bank. They're so numerous out there. But I'm the Extension Forestry Specialist and the South Dakota Department of Ag and Natural Resources Forest Health Specialist. So essentially the tree guy. So tonight I'm going to bring you up to date on a couple of things. The present state of emerald ash borer, where we're finding it, because it is expanding and going over a lot of problems that, like the heat, the humidity, and the moisture that we're receiving in a lot of part of the state. But I'll be the third panelist tonight, so I'm going to play wrap up. And our first person is going to be Robin. So tell them what you're going to talk about and then introduce Joslyn.
Great. That sounds good. Thanks, Dr. Ball. My name is Robin Buterbaugh. I'm an SDSU Extension Horticulture Field Specialist, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about moths. But since moths aren't my specialty, what I'm really going to be kind of highlighting is the plants that moths like. And that's in anticipation of Moth Week coming up, starting on July 20th. And also just because McCrory Gardens is going to be having their Moth Walk this Friday, and I will highlight that in my presentation as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Joslyn, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what she's going to talk about as well.
So hi, my name is Joslyn Fousert, and I'm the Agronomy and Horticulture Research Assistant out at the SDSU Southeast Research Farm. And I'm going to be talking about the potato variety trial that we have out there and comparing conventional tillage and hilling to mulching potatoes. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Robin.
All right. And I will just say again, I'm not an entomologist. So if you have any specific questions about the moths, I would direct you to our urban entomologist, Amanda Bachman, and also Dr. Stephen Robinson. He is our pesticide field specialist, but he has a lot of knowledge about moths as well. So if you have lots of burning moth questions after my presentation, please reach out to them because they'll be able to do a better job answering your questions about the moths. I will give you a little bit of details and then get into the plants. But first, I want to mention, as I said, Moth Walk is happening at McCrory Gardens on Friday, July 19th, and it's going to be a little bit late from 9 to 11. Dr. Stephen Robertson is going to be giving a presentation first, and then we'll be going out and having some UV lights and some sheets and trying to spot any moths that might be attracted to that type of light. And that is in anticipation of the Moth Week. And there's actually an organization, nationalmothweek.org, and they have been working hard to kind of bring moths to a little bit more of the limelight. Butterflies get a lot of the glory, but moths do a lot of work as well in the ecosystem and even as pollinators. And so they've established this Moth Week every year. And McCrory Gardens is one of the sites that is registered on the nationalmothweek.org list of events that are happening around the country. So please get out and enjoy a little walk around McCrory in the dark, which is probably something you don't get to do that often. So getting into moths. When did humans first start paying attention to moths? Well, the legend has it that it was around 2600 BC that a silkworm cocoon from a tree fell into Empress Lu's tea. And instead of just being horrified and dumping it all out, she actually kind of stirred it around with her finger and saw that the silk was unraveling and really became curious and fascinated by it, and soon realized that maybe there was something that they could use this silk for. This picture on the right shows the first potential silkworm kind of farm where they were producing silk. And of course, we all know that China has been famous for silk throughout the ages. That's kind of the basis of the Silk Road. And even if somebody were to tell the secrets about how they were producing this silk, it was a crime punishable by death, I've heard in the research. So it's a little bit of an interesting fact about the kind of the first moths that humans were interacting with. Just a quick question. Both moths and butterflies are in the Lepidoptera family. So if anybody has any guesses, I'll put this out there. Do you think that there are more moth species around or more butterfly species? So actually, there are a lot more moth species. There's about 140,000 identified moth species around the world, but only about 20,000 butterfly species. So when you think about all the different butterflies we see and have come to love, there's actually way more moths. So, and there's some really cool moths too, and some of them are just as colorful. And in North America alone, there's about 11,000 moth species. So that's a kind of a good range of moths that people can get interested in if they want to learn more about that. So a little bit about moths. As I said, this is just kind of the basics, but there are some common moth families. A lot of them that we see around here are the sphinx or hawk moths. There's silk moths or the royal moths and imperial moths. However, those are moths that don't pollinate. There's tiger moths, owlet moths, underwing moths, geometer moths, clearwing moths, and slug moths. And actually, this picture on the bottom is interesting because it's a hag moth caterpillar, which is a type of a slug moth. And that is actually what the caterpillar looks like. So we don't get these up quite as far as South Dakota, but when I was looking at the range map, they are in Nebraska. So I've never seen anything like that, but I think it'd be kind of cool to come across a caterpillar that looked like kind of a fuzzy, weird leaf monster. So what do moths need? They're really actually a lot like butterflies. They need food, so they need nectar as they're adults, but then they also need host plants for the larvae, for the caterpillars. And then they need habitat, also kind of similar to butterflies. They prefer overgrown areas, decaying wood and brush piles, and of course leaf litter. A lot of times those the moth pupae look like brown or dead leaves that you might see in the fall. They also need areas that are free of insecticides. So I know that most of our communities around South Dakota have been spraying for mosquitoes. So there's kind of a give and take as to like whether we want to be able to go outside or whether we can eliminate insecticides entirely. So that's definitely kind of a balance, but the fewer insecticides, the better for moths and all of our other pollinators as well. And of course, I think many people have heard that moths need protection from light pollution because all of the lights in communities really kind of messes up their navigation and a lot of other factors. I was doing, as part of this research, that moths have a way of getting away from bats at night with the bat echolocation, but moths who are attracted to lights kind of forget to do this like instinctive aversion tactic for bats, so it makes them more likely to be eaten by bats. So one way we can provide some better habitat for moths is just turn off some of our lights. We don't necessarily need big garage lights and overhead lights outside on all the time necessarily, especially in urban areas, or having lights that face downward and not necessarily up into the sky is helpful, or just having your lights on motion sensors. So those are a couple different ways that we can minimize the lights that might be distracting the moths. So if you're thinking about planting plants for moths, like I mentioned, it's really similar to butterflies. The adults need the nectar. So really any pollinator plants that are providing nectar are good for moths as well. Of course, some moths are day flyers and some moths are night flyers. So the moths that are out in the day really can be just thought of as almost like butterflies in the plant types that they need. And then I will talk a little bit more about some examples of plants that will be good for the night flying moths. So some of the characteristics of the flowers that moths prefer, especially for those night flying moths, blooms that stay open late into the day and into the night are good. Blooms that are more fragrant later in the day and in the night, having pale colored or white flowers that kind of like reflect any of the moonlight, can draw them in. Having trumpet-shaped flowers with lots of nectar is important. And then, of course, like anything else, having a variety of plants, diversity So annuals, perennials, woody plants, vines. I mean, there's moths that prefer trees. There's moths that prefer normal flowers and herbaceous plants, and then even some of those vines as well. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of the night blooming flowers. So the reason I put these both here is because I want to highlight the importance of the scientific names for our plants when we want to be purchasing the correct plants. So both the Datura species and the Ipomaea species are called sometimes generically moonflowers. So if you have a specific plant in mind, you definitely want to be looking at the scientific name to make sure that you're getting the right plant. Another name for the first moonflower is also devil's trumpet. It gets to be about 2 to 5 feet. It's an annual. It's not a native plant. And the flowers on this one face upward. And there is another plant. I don't have a picture of that one. It's the Brugmansia species, and that one is called angel's trumpet. And on those ones, the flowers face downward. So that is the difference there. The other moonflower, otherwise known as the night blooming morning glory, is the Ipomaea alba. There's a couple other different species in that genus. That one is a vine. It can vine up to 20 feet. It's also an annual, and it's part of the morning glory family, but it's a night blooming morning glory. A couple other night blooming flowers. So flowering tobacco is one that's pretty readily available. Nicotiana species. I see it often in the garden. I've planted it in my garden before. There's a lot of different varieties. You can get different colors, white, pale pink. You can see that this is kind of a darker pink fuchsia color here. This is about 3 to 5 feet tall. It's also an annual, and it's very fragrant. So it's something that's kind of nice to have in your garden if you want to have a moon and moth garden. This is also not necessarily native to South Dakota, but a little bit further south in the Southwest and in Central America. And then the fourth plant here is the evening primrose. This is a native plant to South Dakota and to North America, Onethera biennis. This is a biennial. It can kind of act as a perennial because it really readily reseeds itself. That gets to be about 3 to 5 feet tall, and it's a great pollinator plant, and it's also good for moths because it blooms in the evening. I know that this is a lot here, but I know sometimes people like to take pictures of the slides. So the first 4 plants that I talked about as night blooming flowers were just a couple of them that are available to you for planting. And this is a table of even more of the night blooming flowers if you're interested in looking into this even further. And then, of course, as with butterflies, moths also need to have plants that they raise their young on, and many of our pollinators, moths and butterflies, are specialists, so they do require specific plants in order to raise their young. So a couple host plants that I've highlighted here in this presentation is northern bush honeysuckle is a host plant for the laurel sphinx moth. And this is not to be confused with the typical honeysuckles, the bush honeysuckles that you might see at garden centers sometimes. That's Solanacea japonica. That is a non-native honeysuckle, but this northern bush honeysuckle is a native honeysuckle. So I would encourage people to seek out and plant the native honeysuckles as they're good for restorations, for native plantings, and then they're also a host plant for the sphinx moth. And this shrub gets to be about 3 to 5 feet, both tall and wide, and it's got these kind of pretty yellow and salmony pink colored flowers. And then we often hear about milkweeds for monarch butterflies because, of course, milkweeds are the host plant for monarchs, but they also are a host plant for the milkweed tussock moth. And so not everybody is a big fan of the tussock moth because they can do a lot of damage to the milkweeds and kind of reduce the availability of the milkweeds for the monarchs. But they are a really cute little caterpillar, as you can see down in the bottom right picture. And I have a picture of the swamp milkweed here, but really they can feed on just about any of the milkweeds. So obviously milkweed is a native perennial. It gets to be about 3 to 5 feet tall. This rose or swamp milkweed, it does like moist soils, but it can still grow in a little bit drier soils as well. So even if you don't have a wetter area in your yard, you can still plant the swamp milkweed plant. And interestingly enough, I've mentioned this before, but swamp milkweed is actually the milkweed species that one of our NPI graduate students, Grace Vilmo, found in her research to be the preferred plant for monarch butterflies to lay their eggs. And they also found that there were more caterpillars on the swamp milkweed as well. So it kind of is doing double duty there. Many of you are familiar with the different blazing stars. We have prairie blazing star, meadow blazing star, Rocky Mountain blazing star. Those are the Elaeatra species. So really there's a blazing star for just about any type of environment that you have, whether it's a little bit wetter, drier, rocky, more prairie. And they are the larval host plant for these really pretty flower moths. There's a bunch of different types of flower moths. This one here is just kind of a pretty pink one. It's one of the moths. It's a little bit brighter than some of the other ones. But the Liatris is a host plant for some of these flower moths. And Liatris is also a native perennial. It can get anywhere between, some of the varieties are even shorter, but 3 to 5 or even maybe 6 feet tall. And then the final plant that I'm highlighting today is our soapweed yucca. We don't see it as much here on the eastern side of the state, but out west, sometimes people consider it more of a weed. But over here, people plant it for kind of an architectural landscape plant. It's also a native perennial, gets to be about 3 to 4 feet, and it's the only plant that the yucca moth can complete its life cycle on. And that picture over there on the right is a yucca moth. I just have a couple of resources here and references. Xerces Society is a great resource if you're looking at any sort of entomology, whether it's insects or butterflies or moths or pollinators. Darksky.org is a really great website that highlights the importance of keeping our urban lights kind of reduced for not only moths, but other reasons as well, for bats and things like that. And then there was a really good publication called The Beginner's Guide to Moths of the Midwest, written in part by Angela Morehouse and the Illinois Nature Preserve Commission. So those are just a few of the references for finding out more about moths. And then this picture here, I don't know what kind of moth this is. So again, you'll have to ask Dr. Robertson, but he provided this photo of a moth on a flower bud at night. So. And that is all I have. So if anybody has any questions, I will try to answer any of those questions if I can about plants that are good for moths. I think, Joslyn, if you're ready, I will pass it over to you.
Okay, sounds good. I apologize in advance. I had a bit of technology issues, so someone will be advancing my slides for me and I'll just be speaking on them. So I'm going to talk about the potato variety trial, to hill or not to hill, and it's a comparison of mulch versus in-season tillage for weed control with 5 potato varieties. So this first slide here is just kind of like a general plot layout to kind of see like how we design this study. So there's a total of 4 reps, and then we have our 5 potato varieties, and we have like a guardrail on the very outside, which is the orange color there. And then we have kind of alternating where the light gray color is, that's where we did like normal tillage and hilling. And then where the dark gray is, that's where we applied a heavy, thick alfalfa grass mulch on there. So we selected 5 potato varieties, and these 5 potato varieties did come from Johnny's selected seed. We did a caribou russet, a purple Viking, an Adirondack blue, and a Kennebec and a Satina. So the caribou russet is a mid-season potato, and it's a superior baking potato for the north developed by the University of Maine. Caribou russet has the best classic baked potato flavor that Johnny Select Seed has found. It's also excellent for mashing. It has moderate yields of very attractive oval oval to oblong russet tubers that store well. And the shape is generally more elongated than Gold Rush, and it's bred for cool climates, which, I mean, with the last few days of heat we've had around here, probably has not been great for it. But the caribou russet performs best in the northern tier of the US, resistant to gold nematode race R01. And the plant variety is protected by USDA, and it's USDA certified organic, which is also a point that I need to touch on. This study is being currently done on organic certified land. So, and then this is also resistant to scab intermediately, and then verticillium wilt also has some resistance to that too. And so then we also selected a purple Viking, and this is a early producer. It produces a purple beauty. It's a deep purple skin with pink splashes and pure white flesh. It's vibrant and eye-catching. It's early to bulk and mature. It has some leaf hopper resistance and good scab tolerance. It's known for creating perfect mashed potatoes, but it's also great for other cooking reasons. And it's a rare cultivar used exclusively for table stock. And then here they specify your space density of 8 to 10 inches. And again, it's a USDA certified organic. And here it also has some intermediate scab resistance. And so now we have the Adirondack Blue. This one is not USDA certified organic. So the rule of thumb is, if there is a variety out there that you would like to produce, but it is not you can't find it as certified organic, you have to find at least 3 other locations that you could potentially purchase it as organic from and prove that they are also sold out. And then you need to contact your organic certifier and clear it with them that you are good to go ahead and purchase a non-certified organic seed, but that seed cannot be treated. And so this potato seed is an early to mid-season producer. It's a medium purple skin and flesh. It has high yields of large oblong tubers with consistent blue-violet flesh, and it holds color when cooked. And the deep eyes on there, you can kind of see the dimples on there. It shows a kind of unique look, and it's high in antioxidants. Something cool that I noticed when this potato was coming up and emerging was that the actual green foliage, it wasn't so green. It was more of kind of a purple tint to it. So I could stand at the edge of the plots and literally pick out where every single row of these was, which I thought was pretty cool. And then we have the Kennebec. This one is also organic. It's a mid-season producer. It's an excellent all-purpose potato. It has high yields of round to oblong tubers with buff skin and white flesh that store well. It's widely adapted, it's fast growing, and again, they specify 8 to 10 inches to avoid overly large tubers. And it has disease resistance of intermediate resistance to the foliar late blight. And then last but not least, we have the Satina, which we have in our guard rows as well as kind of a control and check to make sure that we're not having our data skewed one way or the other. So we have this one as a mid-season. It's a yellow skin, yellow flesh. It has gourmet flavor. And then it's always a fresh favorite on the Johnny Selected Seeds research farm. It's silky smooth and buttery for mouth-watering mashed potatoes, and it produces high yields with few culls, and it stores well. And the scab resistance for this one is high, and the tuber late blight is also high for the disease resistance. So when we were prepping to plant the seed potatoes, you never want to put a seed potato in that's larger than 2.5 ounces because you're not really going to get a crazy yield advantage over that. So you want to utilize 1.5 to 2.5 ounce seed potato pieces. And then when you are cutting larger seed potatoes, you want to make sure that you include the eyes of the potatoes on each piece. That way there is a location for a sprout to come up. And then there's 2 options for how to kind of go about planting them in the ground. So after you cut them, you can let them sit for 3 to 4 days to allow for healing to occur where you cut them, or you can plant them directly after you cut them. if you're gonna let them heal, you'll need plenty of oxygen, air movement, and a good humidity in the air along with warmer temps. And then if you're gonna plant them directly into the soil, you need to think about that being as like an open wound. And so you wanna make sure you have optimal planting conditions. You don't wanna plant into wet, cold soil, as this will increase the risk of infection occurring. And so what we did for our seed potatoes was I cut them, and then we actually let them sit for like half a day, and then we went and planted them because we had another thing come up on the farm that we had to attend to. But here is a picture of the tilled field before we got started. We used a BCS walk behind tiller for that, and we got it to about a depth of 3 to 4 inches, and I believe we went over it twice to get that soil good and broken up. And then this is a picture of how I coordinated all the flags for the different varieties. So like the purple ones would be the purple Viking, and then the blue was Adirondack blue. The orange was those guardrails. I tried to kind of match them up with my plot map to kind of make things easier for when we all go out there and we're planting. So that was kind of a good trick to kind of mentally get things all organized and together. So this is a picture of how we planted the conventional tillage potatoes. We planted them 4 inches deep, and we laid out a tape measure. That way we could get our potatoes spaced correctly and then also keep them in a straight line. And then this is a picture of how we planted the mulch potatoes. There was a bit of debate on, do we bury them at least like an inch deep and then put the mulch over, or do we just set them right on top of the soil and then toss the mulch over? And we decided on setting them on top of the soil and then throwing the mulch over top. So here's a picture of one of the workers at the farm. He's the ag foreman. His name's Denver Nordman. He helped with applying this alfalfa mulch. It was a lot of work, but it was well worth it because now it's holding back those weeds and stuff, so we're not having to spend as much time out there pulling weeds. But we applied the alfalfa mulch twice. The first time was directly over the potatoes when we planted them, which was on April 24. And then the second time we had to take that hay and like put it around the potatoes that had already started to emerge, so that we didn't like choke them out and discourage the green growth that they had already put on. And both times we put on about 4 inches of mulch, which then settled down over time into like a heavy mat-like coverage. So literally the next day after we put the mulch on, we had to run out and grab a bunch of livestock panels and toss them on top of the mulch because, you know, we live in South Dakota and there's a lot of wind over here. So we had to grab those panels, put them down, and then the wind kind of blew. But then as the rain came and such, it just kind of started to decompose and like form into that mat-like structure. So the emergence that we've seen was, you could see quite a difference. We planted them on April 24. The conventional tillage plot potatoes emerged a lot more evenly, which you can see in the picture back there. We have the mulched ones up close to us, and then the conventional till ones, there's a set right back behind it. The conventional tillage plots, we noted them for emergence around May 13, while the mulched potato plots, we noted them as emerging around May 21. And part of the reason that we think that the mulched potatoes had trouble emerging was because of pill bugs. So we put that mulch on top, and then we were kind of concerned, like, are we going to get enough rain to even have these potatoes growing underneath that mulch? Which indeed we did, because we had a lot of flooding and a lot of rain come shortly after. And so we started to see some of these potatoes actually decompose and completely disintegrate on us. And then we also had pill bugs munching on those little sprouts that were coming out of those eyes. And you can see on the left-hand picture that that's a picture of a potato that those eyes have just been completely like munched down. And then off to the right, that's a picture of some of the sprout coming up, but you can see where it's all been kind of chewed down as it was trying to pull through and emerge. So we actually went ahead and we pulled back all of the mulch and we applied a spinosad on there, which was for organic certification reasons. We can use that. And then we actually had a lot better emergence occur after that. So we also are seeing some other diseases out in the potato field. I've sprayed 3 times this year of Coside 3000-0, which is a copper spray that's certified for organic. You have to be careful because some of them might say certified for organic, but then when you contact your person within the organic certification, there might actually be other rules that aren't being followed for some labels. So you always have to like double check with your certifier. But I've sprayed 3 times and we have now stopped spraying because we're hoping that this dry, hot weather will kind of reduce the chances of disease spreading. But you can see on the left-hand side, where our preliminary thoughts on that, we didn't like send it off to a plant diagnostic clinic or anything, but we're thinking that that is early blight because you can kind of see that ring in the very bottom scarring on that leaf there, or dead tissue. There's a ring in there, and that's a sign of early blight. And then off to the right, you can kind of see the tip of the leaf is curling up and dying. And we're thinking that that is botrytis. And then we're also seeing some viruses and then verticillium wilt, which I believe is on the next slide. So that's a picture of a virus that we're not really sure what it is, but the leaves are puckering and they're curling, and so that is a sign of a virus for the potatoes. Something that actually Robin kind of spoke on at our field day last week was thinking about different mulches that you could potentially use. So you could use like an oat mulch or maybe like a rye, and just kind of seeing like how do those impact the like possible decomposition or the scabbing of potatoes and such. And so next year, because of how we got like a crazy amount of moisture and stuff, we're going to try to plant those potatoes maybe at the same depth as the tilled and conventional potatoes, and then throw that mulch over top, see what it does, because we're not going to have to put all the effort into hilling those potatoes, and then kind of look at the yield differences between them. Yeah, so I should have let this slide come up, but that's kind of like our future research idea, is kind of to expand this. And the main like focus right now is just looking at like, say, for example, we might notice that the satina has really bad scabbing in the conventional plots, but it has barely any scabs in the mulch plots. And we're going to kind of just look at the culinary quality of the potatoes that we get and the yields, and kind of, I've been like timing our work efforts on the plots and stuff to kind of see like maybe if you get a reduced yield in the mulch plots, but you get a higher yield in your conventional tillage plots, but you have way less like labor input that goes into the mulching and a better like nutrient cycle happening and such, then you might be more lenient towards going towards a mulch, even though you have like a lower yield happening there. So, and that's something really interesting too, is I feel like I can stand out there and I can literally, because I know where the mulch is, I can kind of see where those potatoes are a lot, like the foliage is a lot more green and like nutrient rich because of that alfalfa mulch kind of being a nitrogen source and just breaking down and kind of having a relationship with the microorganisms and such in those like first little layers of the soil and such. So yeah, stay tuned. There will be a farm report written on it in the Southeast Research Farm report. And so we're hoping to have some good yield results coming up here, but that's what research is about, is kind of finding out this stuff and then presenting it to you guys. So thank you.
All right. Well, that was great. Appreciated that one. And everybody was dealing with moisture this year. So anyway, I'm going to pick it up, and I see we have a couple questions, and Robin, I think there's one in the chat box for you to answer after I finish, but I'm going to talk a little bit about trees here. So let's get her started. All right, everyone. Well, you know, one of the things that I like to do, and by the way, it's quit raining, sun's coming out, so I'm going to be a little faded out here just from the sun streaming into my office. But I always like to look at growing degree days, you know, because that really determines insect development and also plant development, particularly flowering and fruiting and that. And we're a little behind this year. You notice it has been relatively cool until the last week or two, and then it's been incredibly hot in some areas, but otherwise, you know, out in the hills, it's been cool when I've been out there working again, except for the last couple of weeks. But that kind of set us back. So we're a little farther behind than we have been the last couple of years. What are we seeing developing? The apples, of course, those crops are coming on. By the way, if you do have your apples looking like this, you have a few too many. And while we really like you to get out there and hand thin them when they're about quarter size, getting out there and thinning them even now would be beneficial. A little late, but still beneficial. By the way, insects love to attack apples when they're touching each other. What a perfect way to go from one to the other. So again, we like to have them spaced out a few inches apart. And if you can still get to that, sure, go ahead. One of the fruits that some of you like, most of you don't, are the mulberries. They look a lot like black raspberries until you bite into one. And while there's an occasional tree out there with sweet fruit, they're few and far between, and most of them lack any flavor whatsoever, depending on your taste buds. But you add enough sugar, you can eat anything. And so get a dish of sugar and about 2 of these, and you got a meal. But it's not like the red mulberries, which occur down south, and those are just as sweet as can be. These are littering your sidewalks right now and staining them and making a mess. But you know, it just is. But we are in the dog days of summer. That's what it's called at this time of year. Nights are a little stiller. Mosquitoes are humming away. It's warm in the evening, and I don't know about you, but you can hear our annual cicadas out there. Now, we do not get those periodic ones, the 13, 17s, and that, not in South Dakota. That occurred further east and further south than us. But every year, of course, we're going to get these buzzing away in our trees. This is a picture of one I took today emerging from that cast skin that you find on the side of the trunks of the tree. And by the way, they take a while to emerge. And while they're doing that, they're vulnerable to a lot of threats. So what else am I seeing? Well, if you go out along the sidewalks right now, you'll find these little mounds of soil. And typically you'll find them by sidewalks, driveway, where that ground's easier worked. Garden spots pretty good as well. And if you look at these little mounds of soil, there's holes in them. And watch what's coming out. It's these cicada killers. And they're just buzzing away. While I was walking a sidewalk in Huron today, they were kind of keeping their eye on me because I was coming by their nests and that, taking some pictures. They look like wasps, and they scare the heck out of people. But they're not going to bother you at all. In fact, you can stand there, they're buzzing around you, looking rather threatening, but it's all just show. They can't do anything to you. The only time I've seen an occasional problem is you get a dog. And a dog sticks its nose down one of the halls. Yeah, it might get bit, but it's not going to hurt them. But be thankful you're not a cicada. Because what cicada killers do is they find a cicada and they sting it. And that paralyzes the cicada. And then they pick it up and carry it back to the nest while it's still alive and put eggs in it. And then when the eggs hatch, the still alive cicada is devoured. Kind of like the movie Aliens. You remember that, the classic 1979 one. It's kind of interesting. I saw today where one's carrying it back and it drops one, and another one goes to grab it and pick it up, because the cicada itself is often the size of the cicada killer. But again, don't panic as you're going down the sidewalk, and that they'll look rather threatening, but they may not be very bright, but they can recognize the difference between a cicada and a human being. So it's not likely to sting you and try to pick you up and carry you to the nest. Oh, yeah, the humidity, dog vomit fungus. I got this picture 2 days ago. When you get hot and humid air, you're going to see this. And I'm getting pictures of this from all up and down eastern South Dakota, where we're really getting the humidity. And it's a slime mold. That makes it sound more pleasant, doesn't it? Initially can come out kind of orange and yellow, and literally some of them can look like somebody just leaned over and hurled all over your mulch. And then they kind of become crusty and gray like this. What they're feeding on is the organic matter in your mulch. And they love, or let's say they don't love anything, but they form best on wood chip mulch, particularly fresh wood chip mulch, because there's a lot to break down there. And if you don't like looking at it, first of all, it kind of dries into a crust over a couple of weeks. You can just break it up, but I just leave it alone. It's not harmful. I mean, don't eat it, but it's not harmful to you or your pets in that. But I'll admit, when it first shows up and it's that bright orange, yellow, chunky sort of color and texture, it can really look bad. I mean, I have people call up and they go, "What's that?" I said, "It looks like your dog vomited in your mulch bed, right?" "Oh, yeah." Well, dog vomit fungus, it gets the name, but it is a slime mold. Closely related to fungus, don't worry about it. If you live in Mitchell, that's our dog vomit capital of South Dakota, because it seems to always have the humidity just to really get it going, and I find it there in a lot of mulch. Well, we're seeing mildew too, powdery mildews on everything. Now, by the way, even though we call it powdery mildew, it's a different fungus on each plant. So the one that affects lilacs doesn't jump over and affect 9-bark, and that's what you're seeing here. By the way, those are the two plants for ornamental woody plants that get affected the most. And for the 9-barks, it's the purple leaf ones that really get a lot of problems, and they do. Now, summer wine is one with fewer problems, but this year I've seen the new leaves almost white. They becoming so infected with powdery mildew. And lilacs, you bet. That's a fairly common problem on lilacs with our high humidity, and that it really allows these to grow. Now, at this point in the season, just let it go. Don't worry about it. It's going to look bad, but go ahead, sit inside in the air conditioner. Don't even look at the plants. If it really bothers you, and you seem to see that every year, if you're down in the Dakota Dunes Vermilion area where we tend to have humidity every year, there are fungicides you can apply, chlorothalonil, for example, as long as it's labeled. If you go online, which is a bad source of information, you can find a lot of homemade recipes with horticultural oils and soaps and that. And I will say there can be some effectiveness for those if you're trying to go organic. But boy, read and follow the label, because some of those really on high temperatures above 85 degrees can be phytotoxic. So make sure you're not adding to the problem. And like most treatments, best applied early rather than when the plant is severely affected. And right now, that's kind of what we're seeing, severely affected plants. So just live with it. Oh, and you're going to live with this too. Apple scab. Every crabapple out there is dropping at leaves. The spring snow crabapple, which a lot of people like to plant because it has beautiful flowers in spring and no fruit, has no leaves at this time of year. I can literally show you some in Brookings. There's not a leaf left on the tree. It's all on the ground because they're that susceptible to the disease. And there's a lot of others that are fairly close in susceptibility, and the plants are maybe 50% defoliated. Half the leaves are already gone, and the rest are going to drop over the next couple of weeks. It's too late to do anything. The spray should have been put on when the buds were just expanding, and then you're spraying about every 10 weeks as long as the weather is wet, which means you've been spraying all the way up until about 2 weeks ago. That's a long time. Now, you know what you should do is, if you got a spring snow crabapple and you don't like looking at the fallen leaves, kill the tree. Start over. Outside my building here, we've got 4 red jewel crabapples. every leaf looks perfect. For those of you who remember the show Garden Line Garden Line back in the old days on PBS. I remember one night as I was going into the studio, I cut a branch off one of these and brought it in and said, "Look at these people. Every leaf is perfect." And one of the other panelists says, "Wow, what did you spray?" Not a thing. It is incredibly resistant to apple scab and still appears to be so. So the best way to manage apple scab is selection of cultivars. And every guide out there on crab apples will tell you its current susceptibility, because it does change a little bit. But and then what do you do this fall? Well, rake up all the fallen leaves if you can. Do a tight mowing in the end, because you're trying to break the leaves down so they decompose, because that's where the spores are going to come next year. Now, by the way, if you do all this in your yard and your neighbor doesn't, they've got a crab apple, it's essentially no control. So this is kind of a neighborhood activity if you've all got crab apples, rather than just one of you doing it. Well, got to finish up with emerald ash borer. We're finding it more and more, and I expect to see more communities. It's going to start snowballing. And you probably have heard Brookings has recently become infested. I'll chat about that in a minute. Sam Keyser from Aspen Arboricultural Solutions sent me this picture down in Lenox. The population there is really building, and you can catch them in your hand, kind of like Canton. They're still out right now. They're beginning to fade out, but there's still quite a few. Stand out there in the middle of the day near an ash tree. You might be able to catch one. But yeah, they're becoming that numerous. And they're emerging from those D-shaped holes. That's the hole you got to see. It's got to be almost perfectly D-shaped. If it's more oval, that's one of our native insects. And that's where we're at right now. We're in Brookings. Now, by the way, Crooks, Brandon, Canton, T, I found it in T on the outskirts of T last week. We're not making any more real announcements about fines in Lincoln and Minnehaha County, just because we're finding it all over the place in those two counties. And of course, it's expanding down in the Dakota Dunes area as well. But yeah, Brookings was a recent find, and obviously there it's causing some problems. The infestation appears to be about 3 years old. And interesting enough, I'd looked in some of the areas 2 years ago, and you kind of thought there was an infestation there, but you couldn't find anything. In other words, when you cut open branches, you couldn't find any larvae. Well, it's because there weren't a lot yet. Now it's fairly easy to find it. And by the way, when we take a look, there's some trees in Brookings that are that far gone already in 3 years. And we've been flying it. And so what's interesting is we can fly with a drone, and you can spot the trees from the air a lot easier than from the ground. So it's fairly advanced, as we've told people at our meeting in Brookings. If you're anywhere in Brookings, the city of, and you really like your ash tree, you should have treated it by should have this last week. Even this week's okay. Otherwise, wait till next spring and get the full benefit from it. And if you don't like your ash tree this fall, cut it down. Landfill in Brookings is getting prepared for this, and certainly you're now under quarantine. The Stephen King's dome has been put over the county. You cannot move any hardwood firewood out of the county. Reason being is most people can't identify what hardwood it is, so we just made it any hardwood firewood. And any raw boards or timbers, logs that you've cut or somebody else cut, you can't move that out of the county without some very special permission from the South Dakota Department of Ag and Natural Resources. And that, so essentially it's no for most of you. And we're probably going to spot a few more. Today was out doing the tree inventory in Huron, South Dakota. Why? Because they're getting ready to put their EAB plan into motion, because we'll probably find it there in 3 years or so. We haven't found it yet, but it's probably coming. So that was kind of a depressing presentation there. going everything that's going on out there in South Dakota in terms of trees. And that the only thing I'd suggest otherwise, folks, is that you may want to water if you're in western South Dakota. Certainly have to do it in Brookings, but in western South Dakota, it's starting to dry out, particularly on those counties on the Wyoming border. But otherwise, there's not a lot of pest treatments you can do at this time of year. So kick back, enjoy the air conditioning in the house, and maybe the buzz of the cicadas outside. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Robin because I did see a question on morning glory. So if you'd like to take that question, we still have a few more minutes.
Sure, yeah. So the question is, what is the best way to start the morning glory moonflower? And so morning glories have kind of a thicker seed coat, and you're going to want to do kind of a pre-soak with those seeds. So, putting them into a dish of warm water for 24 hours or even just overnight to kind of moisten that seed coat, let some of that water start soaking in before you plant the seed. That's one way of doing it. You could also just use like a nail file or clipper to nick the seed. That just helps the water get in as well, and it just kind of speeds up that germination process. So those are the two methods. I've tried not necessarily with morning glory, but with moringa. I have a dwarf moringa tree that I grew from seed, and they have different seeds, but I actually kind of did a little mini experiment where I soaked some, I nicked some. I think I even like soaked and nicked some and just kind of see what my germination rate is with my different seeds. So you could do that if you're into the science experiment part of it. But yeah, some sort of pre-treatment, either soaking or nicking the seed coat just because it's so thick, will really help with the germination of those seeds.
All right. Well, hey, thanks. And I see we have a couple of other questions here about ponderosa pines in the Black Hills. Yes, we're seeing a lot of browning out there. And the browning on the ponderosa pines, a lot of it is diplodia tip blight. And so that affects the very tips of the tree. So you'll see stunted needles. There's also Dothostroma needle blight. So we have a tip blight and a needle blight. The needle blight affects the needles. And if you see a needle that the tips are not green, but kind of browning or even breaking off, and the base of the needle still green, that's probably the needle blight. But as I'm driving from Rapid City up to Rushmore, there's a lot of trees with diplodia. Now, both diseases can be treated, but the applications are made in the spring as the buds begin to swell. And chlorothalonil is an active ingredient that can be used. Usually 2 treatments about 2 weeks apart. But you're just going to have to wait it out at this point and see if they're still green enough next year to provide a treatment. Okay, someone mentioned leaf hoppers on honey locust. Yes, unfortunately, that spray has to be made when the leaves first come out, just as they're beginning to open. And most insecticides that are labeled for trees, such as carbaryls, and that are effective on the leaf hoppers, but most people wait until they see the damage, and by then it's too late. You got to get out there when it's just that leaf is just unfurled. And even if you do everything right, you're not going to get 100% control on that particular insect. And then there was a question about aspen, and I'm afraid I didn't get a good description. I understand the question was about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and I wasn't on that. But the aspen problem we're seeing right now is leaves turning black and sometimes the tips curling. It's a Ventura shoot blight. It's closely related to apple scab. I've seen some aspens that look absolutely horrible. Fortunately, it's not a tree killer, but it is a disfigure. It can be sprayed for, but in the spring as the buds first start to open. At this time of year, I'm afraid there's nothing you can do. And yes, I have seen some small trees killed by it, but usually it just disfigures the tips. We get a lot of leaf drop. And if we have drier weather next year, it should return and look a little bit better. Oh, I like this one. I have basswood trees coming up in my landscape. Can I replant them? You bet you can. They're free trees. Those little nutlets are driving to the ground and they're germinating. And if you can dig them up carefully and move them, you can get free trees. Best way to do it, repurpose them. The only thing is, don't do it right now. It's hot and dry. Give it a few weeks, and I'm giving it a few weeks. Why? Because you want to make sure it's putting on basswood leaves. So you're not actually moving a weed, and you thought you had a basswood tree, but give it till after Labor Day. Labor Day would be a good time to dig up anything you want and move it to a garden. Would be a good location for it. So don't have a lot of competition, and then you can move it the following year. And darn, it's a great tree and they grow fairly well. So I kind of like them. Well, we're coming up to the end of the hour here. Apologize for the last 2 weeks. We did have some technical difficulties 2 weeks ago. And then last week we had not planned on doing one. So that left about a 2-week gap. The only bit of advice I can give everybody is find something cool to drink, sit in the house in the air conditioning and relax. Come to the moth night. If you make sure you have a lot of blood when you show up, you may lose a little, but no, it's not too bad out of McCrory Gardens, and I think you'd have fun coming to that. So I'm going to sign off right now, but I'd like to have Robin give another announcement for that moth night. And then we can finish up if we have anything else from the potato person. The only thing I could think of was the Martian, where he was growing potatoes on Mars. Apparently, technically, he really couldn't do that, but what the heck. All right, Robin, take it away.
Okay, sure. So Friday night from 9 to 11 at McCrory Gardens is going to be the Moth Walk. We're going to have a presentation by Dr. Stephen Robertson the first hour, and then we're going to go out and walk around and try to spot a bunch of moths. So we would love to have everybody join us for the Moth Walk Friday night this week. So thank you.
All right, great. Joslyn, if you're still out there, any closing remarks you want to make, or you just want to say goodbye to the audience?
Yeah, I guess just stay tuned for the yield results this year. So hopefully we'll see some good results. And I know that Dr. Peter Sexton, he's the person I'm working closely with on this research study. He's really looking forward into possibly expanding it into future years and such. So.
All right. Well, sounds great. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Hope you got some good information out of it. Maybe a little depressing at times on the tree end, but come out to the Moth Walk if you want. Wait and see what's going to happen on the potatoes, and I'll probably let you know in a few more weeks where else we're finding emerald ash borer and things that you may want to look for coming to fall, because I know it's hard to believe, but it will come. So with that, everybody, we'll see you. Thanks for joining us tonight.